So we're going to talk about a couple of things, and there is some crossover concepts that we're going to get into that relate to the tapping also. Okay? The name that the psychiatry industry is using for tapping, I mentioned yesterday, is energy medicine. Energy medicine. Okay? ACEP is the developing, growing National Association of Psychiatrists and Psychologists who are adopting energy psychology treatment into their practice. 5 years ago, there was like 4 guys. As of this year, I think they have well over 1,000 docs in their association. 5 years ago, they had 4. Now they have like well over 1,000, and they're growing. And they're very active. They're working with A4M and some other medical groups that do board certification for medical doctors that are going to practice a complementary or integrative medicine. There is such a thing as board certification for medical doctors that practice integrative and complementary medicine. There is such a thing. The largest association that provides these boards is called A4M, and they're out of Orlando. I love those guys. Love them. Okay? But their programs are, my biggest criticism of them is not contextual. My biggest criticism of them is that the average cost of their average board is $25,000. That's for a class as long as this one. In other words, for 100 hours of class, it's $25,000. All right? And that's for a medical doctor to get certified in what I'm teaching you. Because they can. And because medical doctors have to have accredited coursework, they have to be board certified or they can't practice alternative or integrative or complementary medicine. They'll lose their license. So it's literally, to an MD, it's worth millions to have the board certified accreditation. Okay? So A4M is really innovative, ACEP is really innovative, and that they have been lobbying with state boards for recognition, because there is no national standard for accreditation or recognition of a medical doctor. That actually does not exist. It is state by state. So that means there's 50 different standards. There are 50 different standards, okay? And all of them are fluid and are changing. But groups like ACEP and A4M, because they're entirely made up of medical doctors, okay, entirely, they're able to lobby state boards. And they're trying. I have so much respect for these guys. I just love them, okay? And although everything else they do, I'm against, that the doctors do. In other words, the doctors who take the boards are like an oncologist. They'll still carve you up like a Thanksgiving turkey, give you radiation and chemotherapy with a 11 to 13% possible cure rate, even after they take the boards. I hope that the boards will help some of these docs try to really change not just that part of their practice, the bell and whistle, which is because I have a 100-hour board certification in, for example, bioidentical hormone therapy, that is not just something I'm selling where 99% of everything else I do is not holistic. Okay, I call that wolf in sheep's clothing when they work in that fashion. We're a little different in that we're 100% holistic, 100% natural, 100% non-invasive, and no one out of the 4,000 docs that are part of our system, which is SMOC, that's the purple flag back there, we've had a couple of SMOC doctors pass away. Had a good friend of mine died last year of a heart attack. but we have had no patients die. Whereas last year in allopathic medicine in the United States, according to CDC and the Journal of the American Medical Association, about 800,000 people died due to malpractice and physician misadventure in the United States. Okay? And in our association, which has right now about 4,000 practitioners, we have had not one fatality as a result of the practice. So far, not one. Okay? And I just say so far because people come to natural medicine and integrative medicine with all kinds of issues. Charlotte Gerson, who just passed away this year, which is a great loss for all of us, Charlotte used to say, and has said probably 10,000 times, that the biggest problem with the Gerson protocol for cancer treatment is that people wait until they are past stage 4, have had half of their organs removed, have had 4 to 10 rounds of chemotherapy, have had 4 rounds of radiation therapy, and are an organ failure and have a completely collapsed immune system when they show up at the clinic, because finally the last doctor who did the last 4 surgeries on them finally says, I can't remove anything else, or even I know I'll kill you. So there's no more medical treatment available for you. And trust me, man, these docs will put you in surgery and take your money. It is amazing how far they'll push that. I saw that with my own brother over the last 3 years. For a herniated disc, 12 surgeries. For herniated disc and back pain, 12 surgeries. Died 3 times in the last 3 years during surgical procedures immediately after because of infection. Last time came within half an hour, according to the emergency room doc, of dying from sepsis and infection from the most high-tech neurological surgery that is currently available in the United States, which is to put to place a neuroprobe, a Bluetooth-enabled neuroprobe, directly into your spinal cord, where it is actually controlled remotely by the doctor's computer to ameliorate your pain. The devices, surgery and the cost of the device, $1.5 million. Insurance had to pay for it, approve it, and pay for it before they did the surgery. He lasted exactly 3 days, and then they removed it about 20 minutes before it killed him. And he has a scar on his back. I should bring him in here sometime and let you look at his back. It's like the front end of Frankenstein, his back. Okay? And the only thing that they've done for his pain, that was for pain, $1.5 million appliance. It lasted 3 days in his body. $1.5 million. Doctor got paid, company that makes the device got paid, hospital got paid, blah, blah, blah. And even right now to this minute, the only official medically approved treatment available to him is OxyContin and fentanyl. That's it. Absolutely it. He's starting, and this is my brother. A reason why I use my brother is not to be critical of him, but is a family member, and so my family members get caught up in the conventional medical system just like yours. And just because I have 5 doctorates and know a different way to treat things and could have been treating him alternatively from day 1 with no risk of death. None. No risk of death. But insurance wouldn't pay for it. And because he was suing the trucking company that ran into him. He was hit at 50 miles an hour by a tractor trailer while he was stopped in traffic. It knocked his car 60 feet in the air. But it was all caught on video. It was actually on video, the whole thing. Because the reason why traffic had stopped was because a police car had a car pulled over for speeding on the side of the expressway, and the tractor trailer didn't notice all the cars had slowed down and even stopped as they were going by the police car and ran into his car. And you hear on the recording, you hear the brakes, and then you see the tractor trailer, you see the policeman jump backwards onto the hood of his car as the tractor trailer goes by and hits my brother's car. So he had a good case for a settlement. But in order to apply for the settlement, he had to go through conventional medical treatment because he had to prove his injuries. See, you've probably heard that term before. You got to prove your injuries. And if he had gone alternative from the point of view of medical and insurance, then that would have meant that he didn't have the injuries that he had because he chose a different way to treat them. So in order to get the settlement, he had to do the conventional medical treatment, which killed him 3 times, or 2 times, almost 3. And he's a mess because of the surgeries. So we're trying to sort it out. The only thing that we found right now that really helps him is the PEMF, pulse electric magnetic field therapy, far infrared, like you've been using, but different because I have the clinical unit in my office, high-powered unit. The PEMF and the far infrared and cannabis. That's it. And the cannabis works better than OxyContin. And in Florida, because he moved to Florida, he was able to get the cannabis card here in Florida. So his cannabis is legal. Okay? The crossover with energy medicine is, and I brought this out, I'm going to pass this around actually. This is my friend Dr. Pollack, who I put one of his books over here on the list. I don't know if you've got a chance to glance at it or not, on the PEMF, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, okay? My friend Dr. Pollack published this the last day of April, and I just got a copy of it, but it's up to date. I'm going to give it to you. Up to date research on treating depression with PEMF. Treating depression. And how using magnets to treat depression works better than drugs. And there's 4 scientific studies that are quoted there where they did clinical trials comparing in people who are diagnosed with chronic and acute depression and related. Because you don't just get diagnosed with depression, do you? You get diagnosed with depression, anxiety disorder. You get diagnosed with depression, phobic something disorder. You get diagnosed with depression, insomnia, depression. You know, it's never just one thing, right? And so for the complex of depression, magnets work better. In the studies that they are quoting in that article, this is the PEMF they used. But the new one, there's a new one. This is the old one. I'm about to, in the next week, probably after class, I'm probably going to wait, I'm going to send this back to my friends at SOTA. They're in Canada, they're in British Columbia. And they're going to trade this out for me for the new one. And the difference is, it's not more powerful, the new one's not, because this is actually really powerful, okay? At the skin, on the negative pole, when it pulses, it's probably around 7,000 Gauss. The new one has a high frequency pulse, intermittent pulse, that's going to be about 3,000 Gauss, but it's intermittent. It will kick like this. So there'll be a slow pulse and a fast pulse. The slow pulse is for deep, affect deep tissue. The fast pulse is more superficial. Okay? And so this device is used, primarily it was invented and was used to treat skeletal injuries, persistent non-bony fusion, persistent non-osseous fusion, irrecoverable fractures. And I talked about that quite a bit. Now you guys watch my friend Dr. Benjamin Eliezer. By the way, he does have a radio show. You can look him up, Benjamin Eliezer. He's had a show every Saturday for 17 years. I think he's only missed one show in 17 years. And he talks about all things naturopathic, all things natural medicine. And he also does interviews. It's about a 2-hour radio show, which he does every Saturday. Benjamin Eliezer, Dr. Benjamin Eliezer. You can find his radio show really easy. Every Saturday, okay? Ellie, with me, is one of the founders of SMOC, of our alternative medical group. Dr. Eliezer is a really good friend of mine. And he is actually who originally convinced me to work with him to develop this organization and to be part of it. It was Eliezer was actually who sat down with me and said, Anthony, you've got to join us. And here's why. You're Native American, I get it. We're a Christian organization, and that might be a problem, I get it. But you got to let that go, because healing is not about your religious preference. And all spiritual people should prefer, on some way, shape, or form, any religion that's actually doing something good in the world. That's an odd philosophy, I know, but that's where I'm coming from. Because it's weird, you know, I'm Native American by family, okay? I'm Buddhist. I've been a practicing Buddhist since I was 14 years old. Okay? I was a monk for a very short time, only a month, when I was 17 years old. Okay? And no, you'll never see a picture of me when I was a monk, because we didn't do that then. That wasn't a thing. Taking, you know, doing selfies in your robe and whatnot, that wasn't a thing, okay? And been practicing Buddhist, you know, so for example, when I say I'm a doctor of Thai medicine, it's always in the context of Phompen Ma Nuat Ka Phompen Chao Put. I'm a Buddhist medical doctor in Thailand. So technically, that's what I am in Thailand. I'm a Buddhist medical doctor practicing Buddhist medicine. Okay, but I'm Native American by family, so that's cool. You know, in other words, Native Americans can be anything. They can be Buddhist, they can be Catholic, they can be. In fact, all of my family is divided 50-50 in Southern Baptist or Catholic. That's the Native American family. 50-50, Southern Baptist or Catholic. The Southern Baptist half of my family thinks that the Catholic half is going to hell, okay? And the Catholic half, and we're Orthodox, the Catholic half think that the Southern Baptists are just sad and misguided. Just sad and misguided. But the Southern Baptists, my mom was Southern Baptist, my father was Catholic. Native American, but Catholic, all right? And so that was part of why they didn't last as a family. It was because every Sunday we went through this thing where my mom was talking to my dad about how he was going to hell in a handbasket, her term, not mine. And he was just like shaking his head going, it's so sad. You know? It wasn't sustainable. All right? Because they couldn't seem to find a real middle ground. I was the middle ground. Okay? I guess the reason why I mentioned Eliezer, because the way I found Eliezer was I met Dr. Beck. I met Dr. Beck. And I asked Dr. Beck, he was president of the USPA at that time in Chicago. And I asked Dr. Beck who was practicing his protocol in a clinic. Okay? And he told me about Eliezer. But I didn't see Eliezer then. About a year or so later, I went to present at the American Naturopathic Medical Association's National Convention in Las Vegas. I was invited to present. And so I presented to the National Convention of Naturopathic Physicians on Promiwihan C, which is the four boundless or unlimited divine perfect states of mind: love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And I gave a speech at the National Convention on how all natural doctors and naturopaths needed to cultivate a practice of unconditional love and how they could do that. So I didn't teach a technique. In fact, I was the only practitioner at that convention, only speaker at that convention that did not have a product to sell and did not have a technique to demonstrate. And I didn't do Thai. I talked about love. After my presentation, Eliezer kind of beelined me like a shark through seagrass, through a group of people, and virtually tackled me in the lobby of the Riviera Hotel. Virtually tackled me. And Julie was with me. And he grabbed me and he goes, "What are you doing right now?" And I go, about to go all kung fu to get loose from you? Is that a thing? Because I think that's where I'm at. I think that's what I'm a strange man who's got a hold of me. He's kind of a big guy. He's not a small guy. He's ex-Israeli Special Forces. You know, in the military, he's Israeli. And so he goes, no, are you going to go eat? I'm like, well, I could. And he goes, okay, you're coming with me. I'm buying you lunch. And dragged me off. Julie followed. And so we sat and we had lunch, and he asked me 500 questions, and that's how I got to know Eliezer. Okay? But as soon as he introduced himself, because I didn't see his presentation at the ANMA that year, but as soon as he introduced himself, I was like, "Dr. Beck." He goes, "You know Dr. Beck?" And I was like, "I know Dr. Beck. Absolutely, I know him." And he's like, okay, we're on the same page. We're in the same soul group, cluster, soul cluster, you know. He's like, that's all I need to know. So Eliezer did this presentation that you watched last night, okay? He's been using all of these things, the Beck protocol, since Dr. Beck gave them to him. And actually the first blood electrification unit that he started using in his clinic, which is in El Paso, Texas, okay, was the blood electrification, but he built his own machine using Dr. Beck's blueprint specifications. And it was like this big, in a black box, got all the parts from Radio Shack, okay? And that was before the soda people got Dr. Beck's permission to start building his specifications. They're electrical engineers. And they refined his blueprint until now it's really tiny, and it's really, we have a dual function blood electrification and silver maker, which is what this is. Not very big. It has a 9-volt battery in it. But you can also put a DC adapter if you use them a lot. This is the rig for the silver, 2 silver rods clipped into these gold clips, and then this sits in a jar like a mason jar of pure distilled water, okay? And you just turn the unit on, you put a timer on it, and 3 hours later you have silver. It's not instant, okay? However, I do bulk silver. I make gallons of silver, and I make probably some silver every day. And this is also a variation of the Beck protocol in the colloidal silver. And this one's made by my friend Steve Barrick at the Silver Edge. And the difference is on the soda silver maker, you have to stop it periodically and stir it to get the smallest particle size. You have to stop it and stir it every once in a while. Steve's unit uses air to agitate the water the whole time it's making silver. And so the difference is a slightly smaller molecular size. And I can get a denser silver by parts per million, 10, 12, 15, or 20 parts per million in less time than the soda. So it's more powerful and takes less time to, if I'm going to make a gallon, for example, okay, than the soda instrument. But actually, soda instrument is good, and actually the one I recommend to most people. And the reason why is because in addition to making the silver, you have these two electrodes which you use a Velcro band, which comes with it, to attach this to your wrist and your arm. So it's portable. In other words, you can walk around, you can do things, you can be on the computer, you can do whatever you want. And these two electrodes, one is generating a positive charge, one is generating a negative charge at the specific frequency and voltage that Dr. Beck talked about in the documentary that was prescribed by the Eisenhower Medical Study and further research that he did to kill pathogenic bacteria and virus in the blood. And so in the Eisenhower study, they took the electrodes and they actually surgically implanted them in the artery of the AIDS patients. Okay? And what Dr. Beck did was Dr. Beck, Bob C. Beck, worked out the math of how much of an electric charge at the surface of the skin do we need to have to create the magnetic field inside the arteries sufficient to kill the pathogenic virus. Okay? Non-invasively. See, no surgery required. And high efficiency because the unit's powered with a 9-volt battery. And typically, if you had AIDS or Hep C, or you're treating something like that with this, you would use it for approximately 45 minutes to an hour twice a day. And this would be part of a protocol. This is not a cure for AIDS. This is not a cure for Hep C, Hep B, Hep A, we can't say that. And I would never do something like this by itself unless that's all I had. Because technically speaking, if you were one of my AIDS clients, I would have you do everything. In other words, you'd have to change everything. I actually prescribed for one of my clients in Chicago that I had met at the AIDS hospice that they go to Thailand and become a monk. And change everything and tell the monastery that they had AIDS and that they needed to do therapy and so on. And actually it was really cool because they did it. They went to Thailand, they asked to become a monk, the temple accepted them, and the temple also allowed for them and made arrangements for them to get all their medical care and get all their treatment. That person is still alive today. He was full-blown AIDS. His AIDS, his viral count was way over 2,000. And he's still alive today. And that was now 20 years ago. It seems like yesterday to me, but now it's 20 years. But he ended up being a monk for 5 years, which is a good stint. Way longer than I lasted. I lasted a month. But he was a monk for 5 years, okay? And he's still alive. End of story. Okay? And what we did with him was everything. We did silver, we did oxygen, we did magnetic field therapy, but back then, 20 years ago, I didn't have the PEMF or the soda machine or anything like this. Back then, we used big magnets, weighed like 5 pounds. Big ferrous iron ceramic magnets, and that he would put under his pillow when he slept, or he'd sit on when he was meditating, under the cushion, okay, under his cushion. So this is the cheapest of the PEMFs that is high frequency. The least, they're about $380, okay? In my opinion, that's dirt cheap, because the next most powerful unit is $12,000 based on output, based on certified output. A lot of people sell what are called PEMF machines, but they will not certify what the output of the magnetic field is. And there's a reason for that. Because when they're tested by independent people, some of them don't have any. Or it's equivalent to a refrigerator magnet. So you might as well just go to Big Lots and get a fistful of refrigerator magnets and stick them all over. Okay? And what's weird is there might even be a benefit to doing that. And I don't want to even poo-poo that. Because I had a friend who tested a refrigerator magnet, and he was able to show if you taped it right to your skin that he could actually measure with Doppler that it actually increased the superficial capillary flow of the body part where the refrigerator magnet was taped. Okay? This unit, like I said, it's about 7,000. And so the crossover, let's see, is this plugged in, Rob? Oh, there we go. Okay. You only put the negative pole to the skin. Especially if you haven't tested the person for cancer. The positive pole, where the emblem is a concentric magnetic polarity, is positive, so it stimulates. So we don't want to stimulate the growth of a cancer. So you use the negative pole only. So when you use PEMF, you have to be able to tell which side is the magnetic pole. That's another problem. Some PEMF devices, they don't tell you. And people sometimes have a hard time sorting out which is the north pole on a magnet if it doesn't have a big N on it. You can use a compass to find the North Pole, right? You go out in the yard with a compass and the red arrow on the compass will point toward the North Pole. Do you follow me? Which means that the other part that's not red is pointing toward the South Pole. The North Pole on a magnet is the south-facing pole. So that's the way it works. Okay? So, but to show you, like I have an old magnetometer here, which measures field strength of magnets. This is an old analog one. It's as simple as possible. It's not digital. It's not a digital tri-field magnetometer or anything like that. It is just an old school magnetometer. It's been dropped one too many times, which is why it's not calibrated to 0. But it measures positive or negative Gauss coming or going. Okay? And just so you can see, if I just move this into proximity, you should start to see the needle move. And every time you hear that popping sound, there's a capacitor inside this unit which is drawing up a charge, storing a charge. There's a metal coil in this paddle. When the capacitor is full, it releases the electric charge, a high voltage electric charge, through the coil, and then that creates a magnetic field. Do you see the needle moving? All right, how about this? You see that? So as far as the magnetic field is concerned, my body is irrelevant. And here is going 6 inches through bone, through joint. And that is more than strong enough to affect everything from here to here. And those effects, of course, are varietal. There are effects at the level of DNA. There are effects in the ATP or oxidative mechanism in every cell that's affected. It increases circulation, reduces inflammation. It promotes circulation of interstitial fluid. Increases oxygen loading capacity of the tissue that's affected. Reduces sensitivity in nerves, which will have the effect of reducing pain. And produces intracellular heat, like a heating pad, but in every cell that's in the magnetic field that's being affected, that's in the strong part of the magnetic field that's being affected. Microwave diathermy and ultrasound are very risky to use around joints. So that's why you have to have a license as a nurse or a doctor or a physical therapist to use microwave diathermy for physical therapy. That's why you have to have a license. The reason why you have to have a license is because if you're not careful and your frequency or the settings are not right, or you stay too long in one spot, you can kill the marrow in the bone. You can cook the bone marrow. It's microwave. Ultrasound is a microwave, by the way. That's why there's some controversy over using ultrasound for pregnancy, if it's not medically necessary, like doing it for fun. Let's just see what's the sex of the child for fun, okay? So because people hear ultrasound, they don't think microwave. Because if you said, let's microwave your baby in utero, some people might not want to do that. Because maybe they cooked the chicken in a microwave before and they saw what microwaves do to things in the microwave. They might not be so keen. But when you hear ultrasound, oh, that's kinder, gentler. That doesn't sound like I'm going to kill anything, or could. The settings aren't right. You stay too long in one spot. You can overheat to a depth of 6 or 8 inches. You can overheat hot enough to kill the marrow in the bone. And by the way, that's on the spec sheet for every ultrasound piece of equipment you'll ever see, by the way. In fact, you can even go to eBay and you can look for an ultrasound. You can buy ultrasounds on eBay. You shouldn't be able to, but you can, okay? But if you click on the link for the specs of the machine, it'll have all these warning labels. Danger. Warning, Will Robinson. Danger. Danger. Okay? No such danger with a pulse magnetic field. No such danger. Anybody in here except for me who has had MRIs before? Anybody have an MRI? Nice. Which kind did you have? Lying down, standing, sitting? Lying down. Recumbent. Recumbent. Recumbent DNA. No. Okay. So the idea is that, and actually now the new machines, you can stand in them, or you can sit in a chair, and you can do forward bends and back bends, and all in the new ones. Rose's, the one I went to in Rose's MRI was the kind that they wanted me to move in the machine. And so it's actually upright, and I was standing in the machine, and I was doing forward bends in the machine. So they could actually watch the way my spine articulated while I was in the machine, which wasn't much at the time, because I was in a lot of pain. But an MRI machine is 240,000 Gauss pulse 60 times per minute. Bang, 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 bang. Every time it does that. Guys, if you haven't been in an MRI machine, they're really loud. Okay? And they're really cold. They're really cold. Okay? The reason why they're cold is because the machine, well, first of all, 90% of the machine is underground. So the part of the machine that you get in that has the coil and the table, that's the head of the machine. The machine is actually down here in the basement and is much bigger. MRI machines are 2 stories tall. Okay? And the part that you get in is on the 2nd floor, on the top story, with the control room. But the actual machine is in the basement. It's underneath there. Because they have to generate a huge amount of power, and they produce an incredible amount of heat. If they didn't have this super cooling system, they would self-destruct really, really quick. Okay, they get very, very hot. And so the units themselves, the coils, are air conditioned and cooled, okay? And so is the room that you're in is cooled. In other words, they do everything they can so that you don't get cooked when you're in the machine, okay? But PEMF devices produce heat. And they also produce heat inside of you, which is another reason why they cool the room in an MRI machine. But it pulses 60 times a minute, bang, 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 at 250,000, 240,000 Gauss, and that is strong enough that if you were in the room with the MRI in a wheelchair, 10 feet from the machine, the second the machine would go on, it would snatch you up off the ground and slam you at about 100 miles an hour into the machine. People have died in MRI treatment centers because they forgot that you can't have ferrous metal anywhere near an MRI machine. You can't wear a necklace that's made out of iron. You can't have a belt buckle. If you have an iron belt buckle, that's enough metal that it can snatch you off your feet and slam you into the machine. People have been caught in wheelchairs where it grabbed the wheelchair up, snapped it across the room. You can look it up. You could death, fatality, MRI fatalities, where people had old implants that were ferrous in the machine, like maybe shrapnel from the war that was iron, and the machine snatched it right out of their body as soon as they turned the machine on. Because they should have done some x-rays before they put them in the MRI machine. X-rays don't do that. Okay? Now, the physiological effect of being in an MRI machine is some people sometimes have a little bit of disorientation or a little dizziness. And they'll tell you that. You might experience a little dizziness. Might. Some people may, it's a very, very small percentage of people who feel anything at all when they're in the MRI machine. It's 240,000 Gauss. 7,000 Gauss all day long, every day, no harmful effect. However, when I turn this on and it starts pulsing, now if I wanted to hear the pulse, I can, that's what that's for. Let's see what it does. Oh, yeah, so it beeps every time it pulses, okay? This is set on a 20-minute timer, and after 20 minutes it will get hot. If I did 2 cycles in a row, it gets very hot. I've used this on my own for my own back injuries, my own spinal stenosis, and so I've got 4, well, I not have 4 herniated discs. I have no visible disc on an MRI for L2 to L4. There's nothing there. The spinal vertebrae are fused completely together. There's no visible disc at all. Okay, so sometimes when I have back pain, this is what I use. And I like it because this little, one, it almost immediately starts to reduce the pain. Number 2, it gets hot. And that heat is not just in the paddle, it is in the paddle, but it's also in the tissue, the spinal tissue, and the nerves, and the spinal fluid, okay? And that actually feels really good. And it reduces inflammation, which is my only hope in the world, because the only reason my back goes out is when it gets inflamed. If I have a bout of inflammation, right? And this pretty much handles it. I alternate between this and the far infrared, okay? Because far infrared is also really, really good for inflammation and really good for pain, okay? You got to be careful with this. It's really a basketball. I'm holding a basketball here, a magnetic basketball. So anything that's magnetic that gets inside of that basketball is going to get erased. So if you have your purse, a wallet, a credit card, anything that has a magnetic chip, computer disk. In fact, the pulsar technology, Dr. Beck didn't invent that. It was used in the past, really from the dawn of the computer age, to erase VHS disc. In the old days, you wanted to reuse a VHS, you could either copy over what was there before, but sometimes you got all kinds of interference on the tape. You guys don't remember that, okay? But you got all kinds of interference on the tape when you taped over things, right? Better was to erase the tape, and you used a magnetic pulsar to erase the tape. And that's what you would use. And if you had a video store, you had one of these in the store that you would put the tape on, hit the button, run it for a minute, take it off. There's nothing on the tape. The tape is completely back to square one. Factory issue, right? And then you could tape and you wouldn't have interference on the tape. Same for cassette tapes, same for music, and so these things were used in the music industry and TV, broadcasting, et cetera, to erase things, right? And also in computer security industry, when we used to use floppy disk, because if you took something like this and turned it on and put it on the floppy disk or set the floppy disk on it, the floppy disk is now just a piece of plastic. Completely erased, 100%, completely erased. So as a security issue, it was the only way to guarantee that there was no recoverable information on a floppy disk, or on a hard drive, or on a USB. So if you have any of those things, keep them away from this. That's what I'm saying. All right. Any questions about anything I've talked about so far? Yeah.
So how's that different from the sun?
Say it again.
Like, how is that different from the sun's magnetic?
Oh.
Because the sun has a north and a south. And
well, no, it's not the sun. Ions from the sun have positive, negative polarity, and when they encounter the atmosphere of the Earth, okay, because the Earth has an iron core, there's a polarity between the center of the Earth and the atmosphere, and when those ions from the sun encounter that, it creates an effect that we call the magnetosphere, okay? But that positive negative was there before the ions from the sun get there, because it's the difference between the center of the planet and the most external part of the atmosphere. One is negative, one is positive, okay? And it's generating an electromagnetic charge because they're spinning at different rates. So we've got positive, negative electrons, which are spinning at different rates. And see, this was Tesla's path to inventing the generator. Tesla studied nature, and he realized that there was polarity in the ground and there was polarity in the air, and they were not the same. It's polarity in the ground, polarity in the air, and they're not the same. And the difference between them is visible as expression of discharge of what we call static electricity. In other words, you shuffle across a wool carpet and you reach over to somebody's nose and it goes, okay, or a doorknob or whatever, And he realized that what was happening is that there was a difference in polarity of ions between the Earth and the atmosphere, but that we were acting as an intermediary, capturing electricity and magnetism just by moving around in the world. And he suspected that this was the nature of all living things in the world. And he wrote about that. Even when he was quite young, he wrote about that he thought that the nature of life was electromagnetic. Okay? And so his technology was, how do we increase that potential and capture it? And so what he came up with was, because the Earth spins, but the Earth spins at a different speed than the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a little slower. Okay? Earth spins fast. Atmosphere spins a little slower. There's a constant discharge of electricity. We see it in nature as the million lightning strikes every minute somewhere in the world. That's the friction from that. Okay? And so his idea was, well, what if we make a baby Earth? And we have a rod, and instead of having the center part spin, okay, the original model that he had was that the atmosphere would spin, and that was the copper coil, okay, and magnets on the inside. He experimented, magnets on the inside of a coil, magnets on the outside of a coil, spin the magnets, and eventually he came up with, if I spin the magnets in the coil, like the Earth's core is iron, and the atmosphere is the copper wire, and so if I spin the coil, the iron, the magnet, the ferroceramic iron magnet inside of a copper coil, and I have one lead attached to the inner coil and one lead, the magnets, the rod that spins, and one lead attached to the copper wire, that the difference between them when I spin the magnet will be an electric current, and I'll be able to make it constant by regulating the spin. Increase the speed, more current. Decrease the speed, less current. Trying to find the value, what's the fastest speed I can maintain without the unit self-destructing immediately. So the bearings will last and all that. And he worked that out. And once he worked it out and he did his first tests with that, he invented the electric generator. Okay? So, technically speaking, there is no difference. The difference is one of scale. Okay? This is, of course, on our scale. This is not on a celestial, terrestrial scale. This is on a human scale. Okay? And it's also quite localized. And it creates the changes. Like I said, it's like a beach ball. That's how big the field of influence is. And every fraction of an inch you get away from the surface of the paddle, you have half of the magnetic field. So right here I have 7,000 Gauss, okay? Right here I have 3. Right here I have 1. Right here I have none I can measure, because it is a law of diminishing scale. Inverse relationship to source of generation and distance, however far you are from the source of the magnetic field. Tesla worked all that math out. We're still using it. There are no new innovations as far as the word Gauss, determining the strength of a magnetic field, the strength of an electric current. Tesla is where we get all that. Edison got that information from Tesla, who worked for him as a contract employee, okay? Until Edison stole one of his patents, and then Tesla quit, because his boss stole one of his patents and claimed that he invented it. That's another story. Also in the Beck protocol, here we have the ozonator. This produces O3. It's called a cold cathode production unit, which means that it uses, again, a Tesla coil and an anode to charge the atmosphere and separate hydrogen out of the atmosphere and then it concentrates that hydrogen and disperses it through a silicon tube through a diffuser. When you put this in, so it's producing O3. So when you put it in water, okay, it adds an extra hydrogen molecule and an extra oxygen molecule to the water. Now, it will disperse very, very fast. In other words, if I make 8 ounces of oxygen-saturated water, okay, in about 10 minutes or 20 minutes, the water will go back to its ambient density of oxygen based on the temperature of the water and the temperature of the room. So when you make ozonated water, you have to drink it or use it immediately. You have to drink it or use it immediately. Some effects that last longer is one, of course, is O3, ozone, kills anaerobic bacteria on contact. And no bacteria can develop an immunity to O3 because it's combustion. It's combustion. It's not dying because of toxicity. It's actually bursting into flames microscopically. It's combustion. Just like you can see rust happen over time, okay, right? You can have a piece of steel, spray it with some water, let it sit, nothing happens. Come back in a day, maybe see a little teeny tiny little speckle. Come back in another day, it's bigger. Come back in a year, it's covered with rust, okay? So you got to watch really carefully to see metal rust, right? However, every bit of that rusting is a combustion, is fire, is actually combustion. And if things rust too fast, they'll catch on fire. Okay? So you can actually start a fire with iron. You can actually, and I can prove it. I'm not going to do it in class, but it's a really simple science experiment. I can prove to you that I can start a fire with rust, okay, with iron. Go to the hardware store, be careful, use gloves, and do this outdoors. Buy steel wool. Buy steel wool. Put it in a metal pan outside. Take a 9-volt battery and touch the steel wool with the ends of the 9-volt battery. It will burst into flames.